In summer of 1988, my son and I were on a fishing trip in Nova Scotia, near the Eskasoni First Nation community on Cape Breton Island. We had an encounter with a large, ape-like creature while we were fishing for eels along the banks of the Mira River. We were fishing for a few hours or so when we heard loud crashing sounds in the woods behind us. They were strange breaking-type noises. It was unlike anything I've ever heard in the wild. When we turned around to look, we saw a massive, and I mean massive, creature step out from the tree line. It was walking upright, on two legs, like a man. It had to be at least 8 feet tall. The huge creature was covered in dark hair, and it was thick and wide, sort of barrel-shaped but muscular. Its arms seemed extra long and were swinging as it walked. I remember being scared, but at the same time I was amazed by the sight of that thing. Because we were close enough to see its face, I saw a broad nose and a very wide mouth. It kind of stared at us for a few seconds, then it just turned and walked back into the woods. We never saw it again. It was only for a few seconds in 1988, but let me tell you, that brief sighting still affects me to this day.
I want to share something strange that happened to me back in 1973. I was working alone in the Canadian woods, driving a big green tractor with a brush cutter. I was making a path through the thick trees and bushes. It was a nice day, with birds frolicking all around. I had just gotten off of the tractor for a second when a huge and hairy thing stepped out from behind some trees. It looked like a giant person, covered in shiny, reddish-brown hair, just like some reports of Bigfoot or Sasquatch I hear nowadays. I was so surprised and scared that I couldn't move. I froze. The creature stood near the tree for what seemed like a second. Before I knew what was happening, it had reached out and grabbed me. It tucked me under its long and hairy arm like I was a purse. It squeezed me really tight, and it was way stronger than anything I'd ever felt. I couldn't believe what was happening. The creature started carrying me away, running deeper into the forest. The further it ran into the woods, the more terrified I became. I didn't know why the creature had taken me, or even where it was taking me. I tried to break myself free, but no matter how hard I tried, the creature didn't let me go. After maybe a minute or two, and for some unknown reason, it relaxed its grip a bit. I took that chance to get away. I wiggled and moved until I fell out of the creature's grip. It just stood there, looking down at me. I ran as fast as I could back to my tractor, not looking back. I don't think that creature even bothered to chase me. When I finally made it to safety, I was out of breath and really scared. But I was free from that mysterious creature. Even now, though, I still can't explain what that thing's intentions were, or why it eventually let me escape.
I want to tell a story about what happened to me a long time ago, when I was just a young girl. I was on my way home one day, and I can remember carrying a big bunch of cedar roots. I was daydreaming about my planned wedding to a brave young man named Qualak, though he was called Thunderbolt. What happened as I walked along the path will affect me for the rest of my life. Right where the bushes grew thick and close to the path, a big, hairy hand suddenly came out of the brush and covered my mouth. I didn't know it at first, but I was picked up by a young Sasquatch. As I regained my senses, I became very afraid, so I fought with everything I had. I was a very strong girl back then, but this wild man seemed as strong as a bear. He held me still with one arm and used his free hand to put pine sap on my eyes, which blinded me completely. Then, he threw me over his huge shoulder and started running. He ran for a long time. I remember going up and down hills through thick bushes and across many rivers and streams. It seemed like he ran for hours and never slowed down or stopped to rest. At one point we were swimming across a wide river, and I didn't want to drown, so I clung tightly to him, even though I was very scared of him. Despite my fear, I couldn't help but be amazed by his strength and how relaxed his breathing was at that point. Eventually, he started to climb. After climbing for what seemed like a long time, I noticed the air grew very cold and I figured we were near the top of a mountain. Finally, the Sasquatch stopped running and began to move more carefully, as if he were feeling for something with his arm. After a little while, he gently set me down. I could hear people speaking in a language I didn't understand. I sat up and looked around. My heart sank as I realized I was in a huge cave. The floor was covered with soft and well-preserved animal hides. These hides were much better preserved than what we were used to in my tribe. The only light in the cave was a small fire in the center. As my eyes adjusted, I noticed two old-looking wild people beside the young one that brought me here. They were active and friendly with me, and I later learned they were the parents of the young Sasquatch who had kidnapped me. For days I cried, begged, and pleaded with them to let me go, but they would just smile and shake their heads no. It was clear that I was now their prisoner, and I was not allowed to leave the cave. Whenever two of them left, one always stayed in the cave with me. They fed me well, providing roots, fish, and meat. Over time, I learned some words of their language, which was somewhat similar to the Douglaisian dialect. I became curious about how the young Sasquatch caught animals, so I asked him. He smiled and demonstrated with his big furry hands. He'd wait for an animal to come close, then grab and choke it to death. He was indeed big, fast, and strong enough for the task. After about a year in that cave, I grew very sick and weak, unable to eat much. I pleaded with the young Sasquatch to take me back to my people. At first, he, along with his parents, got angry, but I kept begging, telling them I wanted to see my own people before I died. I was really ill, and they could see that. One day, after I had cried for a long time, the young Sasquatch went outside and returned with a leaf full of sap. He used it to stick my eyelids shut again, just like before. Then, he gently lifted me onto his broad shoulder. The journey back felt like a terrible dream. I was lightheaded and in great pain. When we crossed the wide river again, I was too weak to hold on to the Sasquatch, but he held me with one big hand while swimming with the other. When we reached near my home, he carefully laid me down and gently removed the sap from my eyelids. When he was sure I could see again, he shook his head sadly. He pointed at my house and then turned to walk back into the forest. When I staggered back into the house, my family was so happy I was home. They thought I was gone forever. I was too weak to speak at the moment. The same night I was returned, I went into labor and gave birth to a child. Sadly, the little one didn't survive the night. I was kind of relieved, though, for several reasons. The ordeal has changed me, and I hope that I never encounter a Sasquatch again.
If you enjoyed this video, please leave a thumbs up and subscribe to help us grow. Thanks for watching.